What's up, everybody? Greetings and salutations. The Spencer Kyte, your friendly neighborhood Spencer man, back here on SevereMMA's YouTube page with another installment of One Question for Every Fight. This week, we are looking at UFC 284, the second pay-per-view of the year, the second international pay-per-view of the year, taking place on Saturday at RAC Arena in Perth, Australia, headlined by the best fight the UFC can make at this moment. Islam Makhachev defending his lightweight title against featherweight champion Alexander Volkanovski. A very heavily oceanic card, but carrying some very interesting fights, some curious names that I want to learn a little bit more about, see a little bit more from, and just a fight card and some fights that are just wildly fascinating to me. So we're going to dive right in, and we will start, as we always do, at the top of the marquee with, as I said, the best fight the UFC could make right now. Pound for pound number one versus pound for pound number two. Lightweight champ Islam Makhachev defending his title for the first time against featherweight champion Alexander Volkanovski. And my question is, what if Alexander Volkanovski is just that dude? So here's what I mean. Islam Makhachev, to this point, 11 straight wins the title in surprisingly easy fashion against Charles Oliveira at UFC 280 in Abu Dhabi in October. Just goes out and dominates in a way that we haven't seen anybody dominate Charles Oliveira in a long, long time. In a way, quite frankly, that Islam Makhachev hadn't dominated anyone remotely close to that caliber at all throughout this run. He had looked great. He had earned a bunch of finishes consecutively coming into that fight, but he hadn't fought anybody of that caliber until then. Dominated Charles Oliveira, validated all of the things that his teammates, that his coaches, that a number of pundits believed about him being the best lightweight in the world, showed that to be true, and then stood in the center of the octagon and said, I guess my next fight is that little short guy from Australia. Where is he? Bring him in here. And Alexander Volkanovski came into the octagon. They shook hands. They said, let's do it in Australia. And here we are. And the reason I ask, and the reason I frame this question around Volkanovski, is, for me, he is the most complete fighter in the UFC. He is the guy that I have the hardest time picking against here. I will tell you now, I have submitted my picks for the staff picks. I'm ready to sit down with Ian and Harry and tape the preview and offer up my thoughts. Picks and plays, it's in the bank, okay? I am picking Islam Makhachev to win, but I do not feel confident in it at all, because I think there is the possibility that Alexander Volkanovski is just this next level world-class elite talent, and we're not talking about him as such. Now, we all agree that he's terrific, and what he's done in the featherweight division is great, but I think there is an element to Alexander Volkanovski that we're not recognizing yet. And I thought about this, and I talked about this a little bit, having a phone conversation with my guy, Danny Austin, who used to cover the UFC for Post Media alongside me at one point in time. Shouts to Danny. We got real interested in crowning Kamaru Usman as the best welterweight in UFC history, and putting him, if not crowning him, at least putting him in the conversation alongside George St. Pierre when he was on his run. We haven't done that at all with Alexander Volkanovski. We haven't started having the, wait, where does he fit in the pantheon conversations? And I think we have to. And if he wins on Saturday, oh boy, do we have to. He's 14-0 in the UFC. He's on a 22 fight winning streak overall. And from day one in the UFC, fight one, to who he is now, is a completely different fighter. And he gets better every time out. He has navigated some of the toughest spots any champion in the UFC right now has had to navigate. He's stuck in Brian Ortega's 2 signature no man's land, not where you want to be with Brian Ortega chokes in the same round, and still maybe wins that round. That's how much damage he did in the rest of that round, and won that fight handily. He got down 2 rounds against Max Holloway in the second fight and rallied, in my opinion, to do enough to earn that victory. I know it's a contentious fight. Fine, whatever. And since then, since the Ortega fight, he goes out and just puts on an absolute masterclass against Chan Sung Jung and dominates the Korean Zombie in a way we haven't seen anybody dominate the Korean Zombie before or since. And then in the third fight with Max Holloway, the one that we knew was always coming, that if you are a Volkanovski fan or supporter or believer, you never felt was required, but you knew going in, well, Volk's going to make a statement here. And by God, did he. Just absolutely ran away with that fight from start to finish. Masterful performance. And I'm not sure that he can't do that against Islam Makhachev. This is a guy that has been in 5-round wars, that has been in, I'm down 0-2 and I need to rally, has faced the absolute best featherweights on the planet over the last 4 years and beaten them all. And listen, I'm not the guy that is going to criticize Islam Makhachev for who he has and hasn't faced. You can only beat the people that end up across from you. It is not his fault that the Beneil Dariush fight fell apart, or that the Rafael dos Anjos fight fell apart multiple times. He has handled his business. But when you get him in there with Volkanovski, and the reason I'm fascinated by this fight and really fascinated to see what the featherweight champion looks like on Saturday, is what if he is just this guy that is going to be able to figure everybody out and has those intangibles and has that experience and is just completely unflappable in there where nothing phases him. The Ortega submissions didn't phase him. Being down 0-2 to Max didn't phase him, didn't cause him to get off his game plan. So what if being out there with Islam Makhachev and contending with his wrestling early and maybe getting taken down and being down 0-2 or being in some bad spots, he's not going to get flustered by that. And what if Volkanovski not getting flusters Makhachev? Because the one thing that to me is not a legitimate criticism, because as I said, you can only beat the guys that are in front of you, and not getting to the championship rounds ever is a testament to how good Islam Makhachev is. But what if we start getting later in this fight and we start seeing questions and we get to start asking questions about the cardio, about the mindset and the commitment and the belief and all of those difficult things that are only proven out, that are only borne out in the fire of these championship fights. We've seen it all from Volkanovski. We know it's there. We don't 100% that it is with Makhachev. Now, I will say that I think he's got it. I don't need to see it necessarily to believe that he has it. But Volkanovski is a dude that might very well bring it out of him. And I am absolutely just in love with this fight and can't wait for Saturday's main event to get here. Because this is not only number one pound for pound right now, this is a legacy fight. And you can make the argument that it's far more so for Volk than Islam. I agree. Two-weight world champion, beat a guy that's on an 11-fight winning streak by going up in division, certainly carries more weight for him than Islam being the first to defeat Volkanovski in the UFC. But that's a pretty goddamn big feather if Islam Makhachev goes out and beats Alexander Volkanovski. Never mind if he goes out and continues to dominate the way he has. Because if my guy goes out and continues to dominate and makes Volk look like he doesn't belong in there with him, then we got to have a conversation about Islam Makhachev on Tuesday on the Takeaways, me and Harry. This is an amazing fight. As I said, the best fight the UFC can make right now. Not in terms of the biggest names, not in terms of the biggest draws, but in terms of talent. These are the two best fighters that can face each other right now in the UFC. And I can't wait for it. Need a little water and a little pause after that one. Going to be good. We get to the co-main event of the evening, interim featherweight title fight. Love that it is here. Don't necessarily love the combatants, but it is Yair Rodriguez against Josh Emmett. And my question for this one is Yair Rodriguez ready to be that dude? Is he ready to be that dude? I know I've used that dude in back-to-back questions here, but listen, I remember when Yair Rodriguez hit the UFC and there was a ton of fanfare, and he was the guy that was going to be Mexico's first real, true, big, homegrown superstar with championship potential. And he rattles off 6 straight wins, and people think he is ready to go. And he gets that Frankie Edgar fight at UFC 211 in Dallas, Texas. And Frankie beats the hell out of him. Gets on the mic afterwards and famously says, there are levels to this. And since then, Yair Rodriguez has fought 6 times. He is 4-3, 2, and 1 over that stretch, or 4, 1, and 1. The 1 being a no contest. Let me get that right. 4 wins, 1 loss, 1 no contest. I think that's correct. I'm going to pull it up now because I've got my computer in front of me. I want to get you the right information. So yeah, he is, 3 wins, 1 loss, and 1 no contest. God, he's only fought 5 times since then. And it feels like a bit of a waste. That the fact that he's fought only 5 times feels like a bit of a waste. And it's why I ask the question of, is he ready to be this guy? Is he ready to be a UFC champion and the demands that come with being a UFC champion in a spot where, depending on what happens in the main event, if Alexander Volkanovski wins the title, we're going to have a, does he come back to featherweight? What is there for him conversation? Or does he just stay at lightweight where there is a murderer's row of contenders always at the ready, and he will have plenty of guys to defend that title against, even if he wants to fight 3-4 times a year? Yair Rodriguez, it's never been a question of talent. It's never been a question of skill. It's been a question for me of focus, of execution, and truthfully of want to. Does he want to be in there and be a world-class fighter? Or does he want to be who and what he is right now, which is a very good fighter, a popular fighter, a celebrated fighter, and a guy that can just kind of pick his spots, fight when he wants to fight, come and go a little bit as he pleases, have some conflict with the UFC here and there, and settle in as just being permanently in this top 5 in this division, but sometimes around and sometimes not. Now, I'm certainly buoyed by the fact that he is fighting again relatively quickly, right? He fought in July, defeats Brian Ortega by TKO. Ortega's shoulder pops out, and here we are in February, and he's fighting again. So that is a positive sign that speaks to wanting to be here and wanting to do this. But he's got to be ready to go and locked in from second one, and can't be messing around at all on Saturday. Because Josh Emmett, we know what we're getting with him. We know he's ready for this. We know he's about this life. He's going to come in locked and loaded, throwing hammers, shelling up really well, covering up really well, a little bit of wrestling in the back pocket. We'll see if he mixes that in. Josh Emmett, he knows this is my one shot. I've been asking for this shot. I need to make the absolute most of it. So he'll be there. He'll be ready. Will Yair, is he ready to be this guy that everybody, myself included, thought he would be when he debuted back the end of 2014? It's 2020. It's almost been a decade since he debuted. And he's just fighting for an interim title for the first time. I think if you had given me those odds at the start of his career, at the outset of things, after he had knocked out Andre Fili back at whatever UFC that was, I think 189, I'd have said, yeah, I think he probably gets there inside of a decade. Maybe not. And we're going to see on Saturday. Middle fight on the main card, welterweights Jack Della Maddalena and Randy Brown. And the thing I want to know is Della ready for this? That maybe sounds a little weird to some people that are like, dude, it's Randy Brown. I don't think you understand and appreciate how good Randy Brown is. Won 4 straight, figured out how to use his range and his length and the diversity of his striking skills to full advantage. Throws a good long jab, uses a lot of kicks up the middle. It's going to have a considerable height and reach advantage against Della, the hometown boy, on Saturday. This is a considerable step up from Ramazan Emeev and Danny Roberts to Randy Brown. Della looked great last year. 3 first-round finishes in 3 fights, rightfully the Rookie of the Year, both on the UFC website, for me at OSDB Sports, and many other places. And now we see. This is the thing we talk about all the time. This is the thing we ask for all the time. Let's give him the next test. This is the next test. This is both a veteran test and a step up against a guy that's a little bit further along than you, but with a similar mindset of, I want to get this one to prove I'm ready to jump into the top 15 and start facing some of these guys with numbers next to their name. Della has looked the part thus far. Debut win, smashes Pete Rodriguez. Short notice, inexperienced opponent, fine, whatever. You want to discount it, great. Navigates some tricky spots that he probably shouldn't have been in against Ramazan Emeev, but he was in them, he got out of them, and he got the finish, all within 5 minutes. And then just boxed up Danny Roberts. Just went out there and was like, oh, cool. I can hit you a lot from different stances, to the body, to the head. I can shine. And then I can call for my opportunity to fight at home. And lo and behold, here he is. I think Della is a guy that is going to be heard from in this division going forward. I just don't know if it's yet. And that's why I'm so looking forward to this fight, because I really appreciate Randy Brown. I really appreciate what he's grown into since being on Looking for a Fight all the way back at the outset of it. One of the early episodes, I think maybe even episode 2 or the first official episode. Same time they found Mickey Gall calling out CM Punk. And so this is a chance to see what sophomore year Della looks like. I'm a big basketball guy. We talk about development and sort of progress not being linear. As much as you want to see prospects and young players constantly get better year on year, sometimes that's not the way it works. And I want to see if that's what we run into with Della Maddalena on Saturday. Is this a situation where he has to take a step back, or maybe just run level for a year and have 3 fights in this range because he needs to get some of that cage time? He needs to get some of that experience. He's only 26. He's on a great winning streak, 13 straight, but he's only got 15 fights. And so maybe this is where we learn, okay, he's still good, still very much upside, but he needs to hang out here for a little bit because he struggles a little bit with Randy Brown. Maybe he loses. But if he goes out and keeps posting first round finishes, just like the other 2 fights, we're going to have a conversation on Tuesday on the takeaways about where Jack Della Maddalena fits and what the ceiling might be, where the upside is, where it could take him. Fascinating fight. Love this fight. Can't wait for this card. Let's go. Sorry for yelling. Heavyweight fight, Justin Tafa, Parker Porter. I want to know if Justin Tafa is going to be somebody. He's a big, strong Australian dude. He's a big, strong banger. Sorry, my apologies. He is from New Zealand, not Australia. He's a big, strong banger. He's only 29. Still a baby in heavyweight terms. It's been up and down thus far in the UFC, right? It's been mixed results. He's 2-3, but he's coming off a head kick win over Harry Hunsucker when he was the first dude ever to miss weight at heavyweight, which is crazy. You can see the flashes. He comes from a combat sports family. His brother Junior is a very good kickboxer. Was supposed to be on this card, I believe, as well. And this sort of feels a little bit make or break for Justin Tafa. He's had some good moments. There have been some things where you're like, okay, I can see a little bit of the upside, and he is green. He is raw. He is in that Tai Tuivasa when he first got to the UFC sort of state of things. And he needs to figure it out. He needs to develop. He needs to add some stuff. But I think he has room to, right? That last fight that I said, as I said, head kick knockout. That was the end of 2021. We didn't see him last year. A bunch of fights fell through. A bunch of things didn't come together. So he's had a full year to work on some stuff, to figure some stuff out, to refine the game, to build on the game. And I want to see in a matchup against a guy that is solid, but hittable and beatable. Can he go out and do something? One of the staples on this series so far this year has been asking questions primarily of middleweights, of can they become somebody? Can they get on a little run and string together enough wins that we have to start talking about them in greater terms than we do now? And that's what I want to see with Tafa here, because there's always room at the low end of heavyweight to put together 3-4 wins, and then you're in there with a Blagoy Ivanov, or you're in there eventually with a Marcin Tybura. He's young enough. He's explosive enough in terms of his power. He's dynamic enough. We've seen it at times. Heavyweights don't bomb head kicks and get finishes. That makes him a little bit of an outlier. Now, some guys do. We're going to see John Jones throw head kicks. So you know what I mean, though. Generally speaking, we're not seeing guys fire head kicks. And so I just want to see if this guy that I've been intrigued by through his first 5 fights, even though the results have been inconsistent, can use that year off to put some stuff together, to figure some stuff out, to get better, and come out here pretty close to home, surrounded by family and friends, have a great performance, get a second straight victory, and start truly building something going forward. Main card kicks off in the light heavyweight division. The return of Jimmy Crute against Alonzo Menafield. And the thing I'm looking for, the thing that piques my interest, and just what is Jimmy Crute going to be? What's he going to be? Who's he going to become? So he came off the Contender Series, looked good there, got a bunch of wins early, stoppages, finishing dudes. And then the first real true test that he had against Misha Cirkunov out here in Vancouver, fall of 2019, catches a loss, is doing well throughout the fight, and then makes a mistake and gets caught, Peruvian necktied, has to tap. Gets 2 more good wins, right? Goes out, beats Michał Oleksiejczuk, beats Modestas Bukauskas, who's back this weekend. We'll talk about him in a minute. Earns a fight with Anthony Smith when Anthony Smith is on a little bit of a come down, and you think this is Jimmy Crute's moment. He gets kicked, his leg goes dead, fight's over, comes back, fights Jamal Hill, and gets clipped and knocked out in 48 seconds. And here we are. That was at the end of 2021, rehabbed a knee injury throughout 2022, and now here we are. And so overall, it's 12-3, and it's 4-3 in the UFC. He doesn't generally get out of the first round very often since he's been in the UFC, just once against Paul Craig. He's only 26. He turns 27 next month. So still relatively young, and in the light heavyweight division, still relatively young. We've seen the power. We've seen some of the upside, but we've also seen holes. So who is he going to be? Who is he going to grow up to be? You could argue, and I will argue, that Jimmy Crute has suffered from kind of the curse of the light heavyweight division, where you win 2 or 3 fights, and then you're in there with somebody you shouldn't be in there with because the division's just too shallow. And if you impress, you get accelerated to a point where you probably shouldn't. I think that's the case. Not saying that Misha Cirkunov is a world beater and a guy that he shouldn't have been in there with. I think it was just a little too much too soon, and he made a mistake and paid for it. That part's fine. It's the Anthony Smith fight onto the Jamal Hill fight where it starts raising questions for me and makes me wonder, coming into this one against an explosive guy in Alonzo Menafield, who's looked good over his last 2, what's he going to be? What's he become? I think a year away is probably a good thing, would have been a good thing for Jimmy Crute. You can reset. You can put that as chapter 1. Jamal Hill loss is the end of chapter 1. Now we're on to chapter 2. And I start fresh. It's a clean slate. We figure this out. For me, watching this fight on Saturday, there's a couple things I need to see. I want to see a little bit more patience. I want to see a little bit more dialed back and reserved from Jimmy Crute, not just going out and chasing the big finish and chasing big explosive movements. You've got the power. You've got a very good ground game and submission game. Let things come to you a little bit more. Let me see that you've grown into understanding the advantages you have, the strengths you bring to the table, and the areas where you're better than some of these guys. To me, this is a fight where Jimmy Crute drags Alonzo Menafield to the ground and submits him, maybe in the first, maybe in the second, whatever. But I want to see just who's Jimmy Crute going to be in chapter 2 going forward, 27 years old and forward. The 26-year-old up to this point version has been okay. 4-3 is okay. Losing to some better guys is okay. It's happened to lots of fighters that have gone on to have great success in the UFC. So by no means am I saying Jimmy Crute can't recover from this, can't become a contender, maybe even champion somewhere down the line. But chapter 2 starts on Saturday, and I need to see improvements, changes, development, or else chapter 2 is going to read pretty similar to chapter 1. We stick around the heavyweight division. Tyson Pedro against Modestas Bukauskas, who I mentioned earlier. And the question here is centered on Pedro, and it's just, again, similar to the Jimmy Crute thing. Who's Tyson Pedro going to be? Similar, very, very similar situations to Jimmy Crute, right? Gets a couple wins early in his career, good finishes, is young, is new, is exciting. So let's get him in there with guys that he has no business fighting. And he catches some losses. And things go a little sideways at times. And then it gets a little inconsistent, and it is what it is. And he gets injured, and he's out for 3 years. And so the start of that out for 3-year period, he's 3-3 in the UFC. He's coming off 2 losses. He loses to OSP. He loses to Shogun. And it sort of feels like, well, we just kind of burned a relatively young, promising, interesting new light heavyweight. 3 years off with different injuries. For him to come back and be as effective as he was last year in getting first-round wins over Ike Villanueva and Harry Hunsucker is a testament to his work ethic, his fortitude, his drive. I'm not saying those are like life-altering wins. Neither of those gentlemen are currently on the UFC roster. Neither of them had any success in the octagon, but they are wins nonetheless for a guy that hadn't fought in 3 years. And we thought at one point maybe he was just gone. Maybe he was just lost. Now he gets this fight with Bukauskas. It wasn't supposed to be Modestas Bukauskas to start. It was supposed to be Zhemin Yang, who won on the Road to UFC, one of the, I think the very first fight of the Road to UFC series when it was in Shanghai, knocked out George Tokos in the first fight to punch his ticket to the UFC. He had to withdraw. Bukauskas, who won the Cage Warriors title again at the end of the year, gets called back. It's a tough fight. It's a good fight, and it's going to be an opportunity to see who and where Tyson Pedro is right now. Right now, because those 2 wins last year shake off the rust, get you back moving in the right direction, remind you that you can do this, remind you that you're skilled, that you're talented, all of those different things. Build the confidence back up. Now we get real opponents. Now we get guys that can fight. And Bukauskas can fight. And I'm sure there is several jars of Pringles, stacks of Pringles on his shoulder as he goes into this one. After getting cut and going through a tough slate of fights, losing, suffering a bad injury, being released after that, working his way back, had the success in Cage Warriors last year, 2 wins in about 8 weeks at the end of the year to win the title back, and now gets this opportunity. You best believe the Baltic Gladiator is coming in there fired up, looking to show I belong here. I'm better than this dude. Come into Australia and beat this Australian dude on his home turf. And so Tyson Pedro's got to be A game. Historically, this is a fight that he's won, right? Beat Khalil Roundtree, beat Paul Craig, beat Saperbek Safarov. The guys he lost to were more tenured, more veteran guys. Alir Latifi, OSP, Shogun. Bukauskas fits in the middle of those 2 groups, I would say. A little more seasoned than Paul Craig was at the outset, a little more seasoned than Khalil was, obviously, at the outset, but not quite as good as or as experienced as OSP or Shogun, certainly. But this is where Tyson Pedro needs to this is a statement fight. This is a crossroads fight. If you're going to be a contender, if you're going to put some stuff together, it continues this weekend. For Jimmy Crute, it starts this weekend. For Pedro, it continues this weekend. Because a win here is 3 straight. Then we're starting to talk about those top 15 names again. And we're starting to talk about you breaking into the rankings again. If you're going to be that guy, you got to win this one. So we're going to see. Featherweight fight, Joshua Kulibau against Melsik Bagdasaryan. My question here is what have we got in Bagdasaryan? So 31-year-old former kickboxer, under the Ronda Rousey management group, trains out of Glendale Fight Club, all the baggage that comes with that. Won his fight on the Contender Series a couple seasons ago in 2020 against Dennis Bazookia, who's been on the Contender Series twice now, a Sarah Longo guy. Very good, sort of East Coast regional vet, not quite good enough to be in the UFC. Comes into the UFC, beats a fellow Contender Series grad in Colin Anglin, knocks him out in the second round, and then wins a unanimous decision over Bruno Souza. Catchweight fight. Looked good. So far, so good for the gun. But he hasn't fought since November 2021. And he's now 31. And he's only 8 fights into his MMA career. And so this is just one of those, there comes a point in time almost where, like, even if you're super talented, even if you have upside, you have to be able to show up and you have to be able to compete regularly, right? The old cliche of the best ability is availability. Bagdasaryan had to pull out of a couple of fights last year. A couple of fights fell apart for him, whatever the case may be. Some of that is out of your control. Injuries happen, but it certainly limits where you're at. And it brings up questions like this of, what do we got with this dude? Because at 31 in a division at 145, that is always featuring young emerging talents coming forward, wanting to take your place. If you're not fighting and winning 2-3 times a year, you're getting overtaken. Some of that shine and some of that, oh yeah, he's got some momentum. Like all the momentum he built with those early wins, gone. You miss a year, it's just gone. So the record is great. The winning streak overall is nice. Some of the flashes of skill, solid. But you've been out for a year, man. And now you're coming back against a good but not great fighter in Josh Coulibaugh, who's had reasonable success since being back at featherweight, right? Fought Charles Jourdain to a draw, won his next 2 fights against Shailen Nurdembeki and I believe TJ Brown. So, I mean, did his thing against the low end of the talent pool. Sorry, it's not TJ Brown. It's Sungwoo Choi. This is where you prove for both of these guys. This is who goes forward into that next tier. But I think there's a little bit more on Bagdasaryan just because he's been off for a while, because he had a little bit of that buzz, had a little bit of that Ronda Rousey pixie dust sprinkled on him. And we were looking forward to see what this guy could be. And you lose that year and it just fades away. It just dissipates. Even dudes like me that pay attention to all of these names and do my fighters to watch series at the start of every year get to a point where it's like, I need to see you a couple times before I figure out again if I need to watch you, because you're 31 and you haven't fought and you've been dealing with injuries and broken hands and things like that. This is an important one. So we'll see. Move to flyweight. Shannon Ross against Cledson Rodriguez. My question here is, does this fight become a little bit further of a referendum on Dana White's Contender Series? So as I've talked about throughout the last couple of years, I think the level of competition or the level of talent coming off of the Contender Series in recent years hasn't been as good as it was in earlier seasons. I know that probably sounds wild to say, given that we're only a few weeks removed from the first graduate of the Contender Series winning a UFC title happening with Jamal Hill. But I look at a guy like Shannon Ross and I look at someone like Cledson Rodriguez and I go, I just don't know who these people are in this division. I don't know where they fit. I don't know how good they're going to be. Shannon Ross is in his mid-30s. He lost his fight on Contender Series, got a contract because it was discovered later that he had fought dealing with appendicitis. And so certainly that's going to limit your performance. And he had good moments in that fight against Vinicius Salvador, but just couldn't overcome the final sort of onslaught from the big, tall Brazilian. Cledson Rodriguez, same thing, had an okay fight on Contender Series to get his contract, lost his debut. Another one of those just question mark young fighters from the Contender Series. And I think we're getting more of them. And I think as you look through sort of last year's graduating class, so the class of 21 that were rookies last year, right? The class with Della, the class with Michael Morales, but that's also the class with AJ Dobson, who went 0-2 and got bounced from the UFC. We're getting more fighters like that. And overall, if the UFC produces one Jamal Hill or one Ryan Spann, Jeff Neal, Sean O'Malley every season, it's ultimately a win. You just have to hit on one or two out of the 30 or 40 that get contracts for it to be a win, a net positive. But when you're graduating this many fighters up, and so many of them are just becoming swings and misses, I think we start questioning sort of the purpose or the nature of this program, because the talent coming through has quickly dropped off. There's lots of reasons why. I'm happy to talk about them with anybody that wants to get into them. I'm continuing to work on my compilation of spreadsheets of records for the Contender Series graduates so I can get an understanding overall of what we've seen from the people coming off of this show. But I just look at these two and I don't have high hopes for them in this division that is very good and continuing to get better. And I just wonder if a fight like this sort of signifies where we're at with Contender Series right now, that we're waiting on another infusion of really great talent, and we're getting some people that are getting contracts that maybe don't belong at this level just yet. Move to the lightweight division. Jamie Mullarkey takes on 20-year-old newcomer Francisco Prado. And my question here is Prado ready for this? Right? 20 years old, short notice, flying to Australia to take on an Australian guy. It's a tall ask. It's a big ask for a 20-year-old kid. But he's undefeated. He's 11-0, full of confidence. We're just going to see. To me, it's actually a cool test. Jamie Mullarkey is a good old hand. He's a veteran hand. That's the best way I can describe him. Tough, durable, dangerous, coming off a split decision win over Michael Johnson. He's been in there with some good guys. Always was the guy to me that I thought Paddy Pimblett would get matched up with at some point because he's dangerous, but not all the way dangerous. But I just 20-year-olds showing up in the UFC with 11-0 records and a bunch of finishes fascinate me, because I just want to see. We never know, right? We never know if this is just the next dude that shows up and gets unearthed. We didn't think Raul Rojas Jr. was going to be a guy initially. And look, he's a long way from being a capital G guy, but he's interesting as shit right now. Fascinating fighter. Can't wait to see his sophomore fight. So let me see a guy like Prado. And I know that there are other lightweights on the roster that could certainly have slotted into this opportunity, but I'm fine with seeing a 20-year-old get a shot. Just let's see. If he beats a veteran like Jamie Mullarkey right out of the chute, it tells us where he fits for right now. It sets a baseline and it makes him really interesting. Because as much as we're getting some of these younger guys, it's still wild to be 20 years old, and he turns 21 in the summer. So this isn't a turns 21 tomorrow or anything like that. This is still a really young fighter that is in the very early stages of his career, has shown good success on the regional circuit, Samurai Fight House champ, to be fair, limited competition, all of the things that always apply to fighters coming in off the regional circuit with big shiny records. But I want to see it. I'm endlessly fascinated by these kinds of athletes, by these kinds of fights. And so let's get him in there. Let me get a look. I'm a complete weirdo with this stuff, by the way. If you haven't figured that out through these number of episodes, I care about stuff that I know other people don't think about, but I love this. I love this stuff. Somebody I can track for the next 5 years, even if it means he gets bounced in 3 fights and comes back 3 years down the road at 23, 24, 25. Fascinated. Can't wait to see it. Move to featherweight. Jack Jenkins debuting against Don Shainis. And my question, and I will admit it is a slightly unfair one, but can Jack Jenkins be 2023 Jack Della Maddalena? Contender Series grad, Australian, good boxing, tough as nails, good success on the Australian regional circuit as eternal MMA champion. Let's see what Farjak can do. This is a very winnable fight, with all due respect to Mr. Don Shainis, who got called up on short notice, thrown into the deep, deep end of the waters against Sadiq Youssef, was subbed out in 30 seconds. Gets a full camp. I think he looks better here than he certainly did against Sadiq, but I also think this is a very winnable fight for Jack Jenkins fighting at home. And I just want to see, man, Della has probably warped my sense a little bit. And following a number of Australians on Twitter, shouts to Chris Reeve, has probably warped my sense a little bit, but I'm super excited for these fellows from the Commonwealth. Della looked so good. Jack Jenkins looked very good in his Contender Series win. A really like durable, grinded out, stay with it third round finish over Freddie Linares. And I just want to see if this is a guy that can come in and just have success right out of the gate and show me something that just sets a hook. That's all I'm looking for here. This isn't, can he be a contender tomorrow? This is there enough to set the hook? Because the Contender Series win was good enough to get me interested to this point, to where I'm asking this question, and I'm really excited to talk to Jack Jenkins tonight, actually, for UFC.com. Should be up on the website by the time you are seeing this. And then see him on Saturday. And just see if he can set that hook to where I'm looking forward to the sophomore fight, and I'm rewatching this one to see the things that I like and what he's done, and try to get a gauge and forecast where he can go. Love the talent coming out of Australia these days. Jack Jenkins is one of them. He's part of that wave. He is part of that group. Want to see what it looks like on Saturday. Move to the strawweight ranks. Loma Lukbunmi and Elise Reed. My question here is simply which one of them takes another step forward. So Loma Lukbunmi hit the UFC relatively inexperienced in MMA, tons of experience in Muay Thai, and has done relatively well, right? You go 4-2 in the UFC, where your losses are Angie Hill in a fight that is way too early. Angela Hill filling in for, I believe, Hannah Cyphers in that fight, if I'm not mistaken. So that's a huge, like, switch up. Hannah Goldie, not Hannah Cyphers. So to go from relatively inexperienced Hannah Goldie to most experienced fighter in the division, Angela Hill, that's an excusable loss. That's an understandable loss. And then the other one is to Lupe Godinez, who I think highly of as a young emerging talent in this division. Fine, no problem. Loma is getting better. We've seen that throughout her fights. She's learning more. She's blending some of that Muay Thai into her MMA game. We've seen some of the foot sweeps and some of the trips, which is great. She is working with Hickman Brothers over at Bang Tao. Can't wait to hear George Hickman in the corner speaking Thai. It's so dope to me that he's figured, like, obviously he's learned, he's lived there for a while now, but it's still dope every time I hear it. And so I want to see what kind of progression Loma has had since her last fight, a win over Denise Gomes. She turned 27 a couple of weeks ago. She's starting to hit that prime of her athletic career, getting that more experience. Let's see what she can do. And on the flip with Elise Reed, I mean, you throw out the flyweight debut against Sajara Eubanks. Not the right division, way overmatched. It went the way it went. Fine. Truthfully, I think Elise Reed is probably an atomweight, but they don't have that in the UFC. Regardless, since then, it's 2-1. Split decision over Corey McKenna. Third round loss to Sam Hughes. Bounces back with a win over Super Mel Martinez, at UFC 279 last September. And so it's just, can we get some consistency? Can you put a couple wins together? Can you show me more of the performance rather than just the brashness that we saw in some of these fights, right? We saw a little bit of cockiness in the fight with Corey McKenna and a little bit in the fight with Sam Hughes. Can we just see the consistency and the go forward improving that we saw in the fight with Super Melly? It's a competitive matchup. It's a good fight for each woman at this time. Both are coming off good wins over opponents that maybe not they should have beaten, but it's good that they beat them. It sets a baseline. It sets that good understanding of where they're at. Now let's see what happens going forward. Move back to the featherweight division. Shane Young returns against Contender Series graduate Blake Bilder. And my question here is simply about Blake Bilder. Like, what is this dude? What is this dude? That's the best way I can put it. Because here's the thing with Blake Bilder. 7-0-1. Good win over Alex Morgan, a Canadian talent on the Contender Series to punch his ticket to the UFC. But he's 32. And I don't know a lot of 32-year-olds that hit the UFC for their debut and are going somewhere. And I say that, I mean, like, not limiting Blake Bilder, not saying he's incapable, but it's just such an interesting time. It's just such a curious position to be in. Like, this is a guy whose pro debut was in 2018. So it's not like he's been fighting for an extremely long period, got to the sport clearly a little later in life. Now, he had a big, long amateur career, and it looks, from looking at that he had some stuff come up between the end of his amateur career and the start of his pro career, because his last amateur fight is in October 2016 and his pro debut is in February of 2018. So there's a full year there that's missing, plus some months. Not sure if it was an injury or life stuff or whatever. But this is a guy that's never tasted defeat in his career. He's got one draw. That's the only blemish. Otherwise, it's all victories. And so, what is he? Shane Young is a tough bastard. He is a hard-nosed, coming forward, try to knock your head into the third row, angry city kickboxing representative that is going to look to just make a statement. He's lost 2 straight. One of those was a short notice replacement opponent in Ludovic Klein, who didn't make weight. And I remember he was really pissed off about that. The last one was Omar Morales, who is a very good fighter. And so Blake Bilder's facing a feisty opponent on Saturday. And I just want to see, like, the last couple wins are wins over good regional opponents fighting in CFFC. You know how I think about that promotion. As I said, very good win over Alex Morgan on the Contender Series to get to this point. But let's just see. 32 is such a weird age to be hitting the UFC and making your big stage debut. Like, it'd be different if there was a couple Bellator fights in here and a season in the PFL or something like that. But he's 8 fights deep and he's 32. And I just don't know. And that makes me so curious. That makes me want to tune in to the second fight of the night on Saturday. I hope it does for you as well. We get to the opener, the final fight in this series. Lightweight battle, Zubara Tukagov against Elvis Brenner. My question is, which Tukagov do we get? He might be, for me, the most frustrating fighter I have watched over the course of their UFC career, because there's no denying the talent. There's no denying that this dude, if he were locked in and competed regularly and didn't run into visa issues or suspensions or whatever, could be a contender in this division. He's that good. He's that talented. He's got all the pieces, right? But he's also that guy, for me, that has all the pieces, and I sit here and look at it and go, what a waste. What a goddamn shame. And I'm sure there's other fighters in the promotion and outside of the promotion that look at him and go, God, if I had that talent, with my work ethic, with my drive, with my passion, with all of those things, how far would I be? And here's this guy squandering it a little bit. And it feels like he squandered it a little bit. He's 25-1 overall, comes in off a brilliant performance against Ricardo Ramos last time out. But that's on October 30th, 2021. My birthday 2 years ago, or a year and change ago. UFC 267 in Abu Dhabi. He lost the fight before that to Hakeem Dawodu in a fight that was right there for him to win, and he just didn't. He has the split draw against Lerone Murphy in Abu Dhabi. He's got the split decision loss to Hanato Moicano all the way back at UFC 198. Like, just a guy that has been right close. Like, the losses and the setbacks in the UFC, they're all split decisions. He's freakishly close to being undefeated in the UFC, and a guy that we're talking about, like, Is he a dark horse contender in this division? And instead he's opening the show and a gigantic question mark because you just don't know whether he's going to come in locked in or not. If he looks like he did against Ricardo Ramos every time out, he gets into the top 15 this year and fights 2-3 times this year. But all of those things are just, you can't bet on them. You can't bank on them at all, because it's just as likely that something goes sideways before he gets into the cage on Saturday as it is that he shows up and looks great, as it is that he shows up and he looks a little disinterested because he's fighting a short notice replacement instead of the guy he was originally scheduled to face, and just goes, well, so be it. Because he was originally supposed to fight Yoel Alvarez. And good Lord, was that going to be fun. And so Tukhugov is one of those guys that skill for skill, talent for talent, he's really goddamn good. But you just don't know if he wants it. You just don't know if he has the desire to be that guy. And so you can't forecast what you're going to get from him, each and every time he steps into the octagon. He should run through Elvis Brenner on Saturday. He should. Will he? We'll find out Saturday. Because it could just not happen. He should have ran through, in my opinion, Lerone Murphy back in the day, when Lerone Murphy was just a baby coming into this, hadn't fought anybody near that level of competition and did very well. But Tukhugov also fought down to that level that night. And that's the risk with him every time out. And so I want to see on Saturday, just, can he be locked in? Can he be dialed in? Can we get good performances? I'm not hoping you become a dark horse. I'm not hoping you become a contender. But every time I see you, I want a good performance. Otherwise, it's going to just feel like a waste. And I hate that. That sucks. Looking at a guy that should be further along and better than they are. And it just feels like, such a missed opportunity. He feels like a missed opportunity. And I don't want to see that on Saturday to kick off the card, because I'm excited for this card. I want this to be all rise all the way through. Start good, get better, keep getting better, get me to that main event. Best fight the UFC could possibly make at this time. Islam Makhachev, Alexander Volkanovski. I am pumped up. I hope you are as well. I hope this program, this series, this episode put some thoughts in your mind, got you a little interested in some matchups that maybe you weren't thinking about, got you looking at some athletes that maybe you hadn't considered, got you excited for Saturday. I will be back tomorrow with 10 things I like. Ian, Harry, and I will be around for the preview show as well. That will come out on Thursday. Then Ian and I will be back for the Severe Picks and Plays, where I will try to recover from the Duho Choi point deduction, costing me a very nice winning week, to get back on the good side of things. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Please subscribe. Please follow the Patreon, SevereMMA.com/Patreon. Subscribe to that. It is worth every little penny that you provide to it. It's a $5. It's well worth it. Just go sign up. Follow the boys on Twitter. Follow me at Spencer Kyte, not Spencer Kyte. Love you. Appreciate you. Looking forward to talking to you tomorrow. Have a great day.